rogue, pursuing its own goals without meaningful oversight from elected officials, or our officials are colluding with one another to lie to the public, apparently for political reasons. Either way, something ominous is happening in Washington. Last year's election terrified the permanent class here, mostly because it was a genuine populist uprising that they couldn't control despite all efforts. Since the election, they've done everything in their power to reverse the results or simply pretend it never happened. In an ironic twist, they become exactly what they claim to oppose. They collude behind closed doors to push a narrative of secret collusion. They compare the president to Vladimir Putin and then use secret surveillance and politically motivated leaks to menace their political enemies. And then, for good measure, they lie about it. In the name of protecting democracy, they're doing everything they can to subvert the results of a democratic vote. Irony of ironies. No Russian hacking has ever threatened this country more than that. Solomon Weisenberg served as a deputy independent counsel during Ken Starr's investigation of the Clinton administration those many years ago, and he joins us tonight. Mr. Weisenberg, thanks a lot for coming on. It seems like...
Thank you. Many years ago.
Many years ago. I remember it very well. It seems like, to civilians like me, a very big deal for the federal government, independent prosecutor, or anyone working for the federal government to initiate a wiretap against a campaign official in the middle of a campaign. Would that have given you pause? Does that seem weird to you?
I think it's worrisome if it happened. We don't really know for sure whether it happened. And I think, Tucker, it's good to keep something in mind for you and all your viewers to keep it in mind. Having been through and participated in a high-profile investigation like this, you can just assume that 50% of what you read, at a minimum, about what Mueller is doing is utterly false. And you can assume that at least 50% of what Mueller is doing at any given time is not in the papers, and you have no idea what it is. Now, that being said...
By the way, that's my assumption about everything. Everything I hear in Washington, I take 50% off the top of everything. But this specific allegation that he was wiretapped, that Manafort was a subject of government surveillance, is something that's been floating around for a while, and it does seem possible to me. Does it seem possible to you?
Well, certainly in light of the CNN story, it does. Now, you always have to look at who is sourcing a story, but I agree with you that if something like this happened, it's very disturbing. It doesn't mean that it's automatically something that was wrong and shouldn't have happened, but I think it's very troubling any time one administration goes and tries to get a wiretap of a major figure in the party opposing it, certainly opposing its party in the upcoming election.
Right. Well, we know what happened to Michael Flynn. I mean, we know what happened to Flynn. So, I mean, it doesn't seem crazy to assume it might have happened to Paul Manafort. So the nature of this investigation, and again, I'm discounting the 50% that you suggested, but seems to have changed, from what we can tell, from an investigation into collusion between Trump and people around him with the Russian government into an investigation that includes financial dealings going back some years, long before he entered the last race. If that is true, that does seem like mission creep on a pretty grand scale.
Well, I think Mueller has a pretty broad, if I remember his charter correctly, he has a pretty broad scope of inquiry, and that's common in investigations like this. And there's no indication that I've seen that Mueller is involved in any of these wiretap applications. But there's no question, when you bring a guy like Bob Mueller on, you're going to get a very thorough and an extremely aggressive investigation. That's the way he operates. And really, Bob Mueller doesn't care what you think or I think or anybody thinks.
Well, he ought to care what we think, because we're American citizens and he's not God. And there was a New York Times piece in which you're quoted that said, and I'm not defending Paul Manafort, by the way, whom I don't know, and I'm not carrying water for Paul Manafort, that's for sure. However, in the piece it said that federal agents picked his front door, the lock on his front door, and emerged in order to scare the crap out of him. And you're quoted saying that's exactly what they were doing. What's the point of that in a free society, to behave that way? Why not just ask him to open the door? It seems police state-ish to me.
Well, I wasn't speaking about the particular tactic that they used in that case. of basically telling a magistrate, if the story is to be believed, there were exigent circumstances, and then picking the lock. That's very unusual. What I was simply saying is that Mueller, very much like Patrick Fitzgerald in the Scooter Libby investigation, wanted to set a tone very early on, which is what prosecutors need to do when they come in on these investigations. Doesn't mean that's an excuse to act improperly, but he's setting a tone and he's letting people know, hey, folks, I'm not screwing around. This is serious. I know what I'm doing, and I'm not lollygagging around. And there's no question that he's doing that. Now, he's got a number one lieutenant, Andrew Weissman, who's very well known for doing that. The Enron investigation, Weissman, as you know, headed that task force, and that's a task force that had a lot of very legitimate criticism. It very much overstepped its bounds. And as you know, virtually all the Enron prosecutions were reversed on appeal.
Yeah, I'm aware of that. And I don't know, for some reason we're more scared of Vladimir Putin than we are of our own prosecutors, and we're wrong, in my view. Salman, thank you for your perspective on that. Well, the news that the Obama administration may have monitored Paul Manafort, spied on him, surveilled him, revives a news story you may have forgotten about, the Russian collusion narrative. In case you've forgotten, for several months, our country's political and media elites thundered without end that the country's government had been overthrown, our government had been overthrown by Vladimir Putin. Here's memory lane for you.
It looks like the FBI does have evidence that there was collusion between Trump campaign members and Russian operatives.
When the story is, again, possibly collusion between Trump associates and Russia.
It's a country who attacked us in the last election, and it's a country where Donald Trump and people on his team have very deep personal, political, and financial ties.
I'm bothered by our country being compromised by a #1 foreign adversary in collusion with our president.
How severe is our problem with Russia? Listen to Morgan Freeman describe it. Watch.
We have been attacked. We are at war.
Juan Williams hosts The Five out of New York every night, and he joins us tonight. Juan, it's great to see you.
Glad to be with you.
So, look, I think you're a reasonable person, and I think it's fair to ask questions about Russia. But now that Morgan Freeman, whom I believe instinctively, and I think most Americans do, has declared that we're at war with Russia, how many troops should we send to Moscow, would you say? More or fewer than Napoleon sent?
Well, I'd say it's a different time, because I think the kind of war that's being conducted against us is obviously a cyber war type of attack, and I think there's not much debate about it. I saw today when our new Trump administration nominee to be ambassador to Russia said without a doubt they tried to interfere in our election.
Yeah, there's not much debate about it, and I would think as a civil libertarian you'd be bothered by that. I know that I am. We're taking all of this on faith from the intelligence agencies, from unseen people with agendas we don't know much about. We've seen this before in a bunch of different conflicts throughout American history where we're lied to repeatedly, and to take their assurances on faith, as we're all doing, seems nuts to me. Why would you join in that?
Oh, because I think there's so many of them. I mean, initially, what we heard, and I don't know how you feel, but from Jim Clapper, Director of National Intelligence, as well as from FBI and Justice Department officials, that there was a clear consensus of all the intelligence agencies, not just one, that, in fact, Russia had aggressively sought to interfere and succeeded in interfering in the 2016 election.
Is that the same Jim Clapper who also assured us under oath that the NSA was not spying on America? Oh, the liar, Jim Clapper.
I anticipated you saying that, but I don't think that impugns Clapper's integrity overall. So,
well, it raises significant questions, but here's what it does. Look, and look, maybe he's right.
Because it's not just Clapper, it's all of these people. So I have respect for our intelligence community. I think they do a terrific job, and I don't think they have any political motive, but you suggest that somehow they're part of the swamp, I guess.
That's entirely silly. I mean, that they have no, you're from here. You don't look in the camera and say they have no political motives. Of course they do. And by the way, they've done good work in some cases. In other cases, like predicting the fall of the Soviet Union or 9/11, they haven't done good work. So it's a mixed bag. But I'm merely saying this. Why shouldn't we have some more evidence?
Tucker, Justice Department, Trump's own Justice Department, has said there's no evidence, they could find no evidence that, in fact, he or Trump Tower had been wiretapped, and that came out just a few weeks ago. So if there's a political motivation, as you suggest, you would think that a Trump Justice Department would come to some conclusion that's more in line with the idea that Trump's tweet back in March was accurate.
Possibly, though, look, that stuff happens, as you know. And my only point is, again and again, I'm an American citizen, and so before you bring me to war, along with Morgan Freeman, I want some evidence. So the U.S. government never examined, the FBI never examined the servers at the Democratic National Committee. And yet, as you know, so I'm only saying, and I would think liberals would join me in saying that, again, before we go to war, why don't you show me one piece of evidence that the government of Russia was involved in hacking the DNC computers? And they have not given us one. Why aren't we demanding it? That's my question. Why are we nodding in this bovine way? They told us this, it must be true. Why would we respond that way?
Well, I don't think that it's a matter of they told us. Again, to my mind, it's a matter of, do you have trust in your intelligence agencies? And I do. And secondly, are they in agreement? Is there somebody standing outside and saying, no, you know, I see it a little differently? Is it the case that Mike Pompeo, now at CIA, Trump's nominee, says, I don't know? Is it the case that Jeff Sessions, now a justice, says, I don't know? No, to the contrary, they say no evidence that Obama ever wiretapped Trump.
So, no, but on the Russia thing, so basically you're saying if all the kids agree on something, I don't know, Pop Rocks will kill you if you drink it with Coke, or what? Bubblegum's made of spider eggs. If all the kids agree that it must be true,
no.
Like, what is this anyway? I'm an adult. Remember, show me the evidence.
Well, I'm glad. I mean, I think that we can ask for evidence once the intelligence reports are made public. We'll have them, but that's not the question at the table. If that's the standard, then there's lots of things we don't know that President Trump knows as President of the United States, and I respect that. But I'm not going to sit here and be a sucker and say, oh, gee, because I haven't seen the details myself, I doubt now the entire intelligence community, the entire Justice Department. I just think that's, in fact, given that Mike Pompeo is the CIA, I'd have to doubt Mike Pompeo and all of CIA. That's a bit much.
I don't know. Let me just say one thing, a compliment to you. I remember back, 15 years ago when the weapons of mass destruction stuff was being touted as irrefutable. And you and a lot of other liberals said, well, gee, I kind of like a little bit more evidence. And I kind of laughed at you. I wish I hadn't laughed at you. I'm serious. And I apologize for doing that because I think trust but verify. I was with you then. I was with you then.
There you
Juan,
go.
In retrospect, great to see you tonight. Thank you,
Tucker.
President Trump went to the UN today and had a lot to say. We'll show you highlights of his speech. It's getting a ton of attention and reaction from the last UN ambassador under the last administration. Bill Richardson will join us. Plus, it's been almost a year, yet Hillary Clinton says she will not rule out seeking a do-over of the last election. What? Details ahead. President Trump made his first speech to the United Nations General Assembly today. It was an unusual moment, even for the august body where Nikita Khrushchev once banged his shoe on a desk. President Trump touted America's military and economic strength, ridiculed our foes, and threatened to crush North Korea if necessary. Watch.
No nation on earth has an interest in seeing this band of criminals arm itself with nuclear weapons and missiles. The United States has great strength and patience. But if it is forced to defend itself or its allies, we will have no choice but to totally destroy North Korea. Rocket Man is on a suicide mission for himself and for his regime. The Iran deal was one of the worst and most one-sided transactions the United States has ever entered into. Frankly, that deal is an embarrassment to the United States.
Bill Richardson is a former governor of New Mexico. He was also President Clinton's UN ambassador. He's also been to North Korea many times, and he joins us tonight. Hey, Governor. Thanks for coming on.
Nice to be with you, Tucker.
So there are lots of parts of this speech I thought they were interesting, but the two that jumped out at me as maybe a departure from previous foreign policy regimes were these. In America, we do not seek to impose our way of life on anyone. That's a massive change. And then as President of the United States, I will always put America first. Does this represent, do you think, a pivot to a foreign policy that revolves around America's interests?
Well, it is President Trump's foreign policy, and he